Good morning. This is not telling you to be quiet, but now is the time for that. It's just a coincidence. It's actually up there because we're starting a new series called Quiet, with the idea of what if being quiet actually speaks the loudest. And we're going to look at the idea of quiet and how it impacts our lives in different ways. And last year, there was this movie that came out called A Quiet Place. Anybody see it? Few people did. I did not see it. But the premise of the movie is these mysterious creatures are in our world. They entered our world. They're probably aliens, I think. And they hunt people, but they can't see. They only use sound. And this is a movie, not a documentary. And these creatures that hunt people with sound only has made it to where people have to be absolutely silent. The smallest noise means if they hear you, they hunt you. That's the tagline of the movie. And so the mom and dad are trying to keep their kids quiet. Good luck with that. Like in my family, I was thinking about this, if it was my family, we would not survive the opening credits. Just gonzo, we'd be done early. But that's the premise of the movie. You need to have a quiet place to stay alive. Well, and sometimes, have you ever heard this? You hear it in movies sometimes where they go, well, it's a little too quiet. Or in parenting, we say that too. It's a little too quiet. Because quiet is so abnormal, it's got to mean something's wrong. But actually, being quiet means something is right. And today we want to talk about the need for quiet in our lives. I live in a noisy world. You do too. And sometimes the noise isn't external, sometimes it's internal. But we live in a lot of noise in our world. They did some experiments. Psychologists love to experiment on us, and they did some on us, people, not this room of people, but they actually went to a college campus, and they had a student walk out with a backpack and an armful of books. And the student would intentionally drop the books in front of people, and they would see how many people would help them pick up the books. 50% of the people, half the people, 5 out of 10, would stop and help the person pick up the books. Then they put right next to it on the sidewalk someone with a lawnmower without a muffler, a very loud lawnmower. Same exact situation, same exact kind of group of people. This time, only 1 in 10 would stop and help pick up the books. Not 50%, 10%. And the only thing that was different was there was a lot of noise. They did research on students that were near an active runway at an airport where jets were taking off and landing. And the students, when that was happening with an active runway, were less productive. They couldn't do simple tasks they normally could do otherwise. Their concentration rates were diminished, and their ability to complete tasks decreased. And the only difference was, were the jets active or not? In prison, some of the loudest complaints, the biggest complaints, is about noise level, not about food or other prison conditions. All the research they do on us and noise and a lack of quiet tells us that a lack of quiet leads to unhealthy lives. And I believe it leads to unhealthy souls. Our world is loud, and so is our personal world, our inner world. And we have a hand in that. At least I know I do in mine. I invite noise in. I don't pursue quieting on a regular basis. And if you're going to try and seek quiet, to find it and fight for it in your life, you need to have a warning. This is a quote from a guy named Gary Thomas. We who have been drugged by diversions cannot expect to enter quiet without struggle. Our souls will roar for diversion. The minute you try and bring quiet into your life, noise will find its way in, and sometimes it's our own invitation. Sometimes those diversions are technology. Do you ever have a quiet moment? What's the first thing you do? How many of you are guilty? No, I'm not going to do a show of hands. This would be uncomfortable. Many of us are guilty of having more than one screen going at the same time. Oh, it's a commercial. Let's see what's going on this screen. Sometimes for us, it's music, which can be a great thing. Sometimes it's just talking. Sometimes it's activity and its pace. Sometimes it's that inner voice. We did a whole series we just finished about talking to ourselves, about how we speak to ourselves and how strategic that is. Sometimes we need to quiet the inner voice. Let me ask you a few questions. When was the last time that you were quiet, just as quiet as you could be for 15 minutes? When was the last time you were in a place where you could hear a pin drop? It was so quiet. I don't know why that's our go-to analogy, but it is. Me, I'd say, when's the last time you were so quiet you could hear a sponge drop? I mean, that seems quieter to me, but pen, let's go with that. Are you able to just to sit without the noise of radio, TV, or a screen for any period of time? Does silence bother you? And if so, why? What's going on when it gets quiet? And what is your go-to diversion when quiet shows up? Well, one of the things I really believe, and we're going to talk about quiet in this series in a lot of different expressions, but today what I want to talk about is that we have a God-given need for quiet, stillness, and solitude. And those are three scarce commodities in our world. And I believe a lack of quiet is damaging our souls. The book of Proverbs, it's a book of wisdom in the Bible, and it talks about the great value of quiet in many different aspects. Proverbs 17:1 says, "Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife." Jesus did this for himself and his disciples, finding places of quiet. It says in Mark 6:31, "Then because there were so many people coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, 'Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest.'" And as Jesus had these disciples for 3 years that he was investing in, I don't think he was just trying to give them a vacation. I think he was modeling a habit of quiet and showing them the importance of it, of pushing pause and resting. And the truth is, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus and let him lead you, I think he will lead you to a similar place as well, to a quiet place. One of the most familiar Psalms in the Bible, Psalm 23, talks about the Lord as our shepherd. Well, if God's going to lead us and shepherd us, this is where he leads us. Psalm 23, verses 2 through 3. "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. And the result of that is he refreshes my soul." Never underestimate the need for soul care. The need for refreshing this mysterious thing that God's created us with called a soul. As a matter of fact, here's why soul care matters. When Jesus was asked, what's the most important commandment? He said this in Matthew 22, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind." This is the first and greatest commandment. He goes on to say the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. We actually put this on our volunteer shirts that actually a lot of you in this room are wearing right now. If you serve at Live Oak, we give this out every Christmas. Love God and love people. And the way it tells us to do that is to love God with all. Every aspect of who you are. And it talks about loving God with all your heart. The heart in the Bible is not the thing that pumps blood in your chest. It's the center of who you are. It's your will, your decision making, your wants, your goals, your desires, your dreams. That's the heart when the Bible speaks of the heart. It's the will. And there's the soul. There's this inner part of you that's designed for a connection with God. It's the spiritual aspect of who you are. And it says love God with all of your soul and with all of your mind. This ability to create, reason, and think and be creative. And God, what he says, we're to love God with all of it. And one of the best things you can bring to the table to worship God is a healthy heart, soul, and mind that's completely surrendered to him, but it's also, you've given it all to him and you're desiring for it to be refreshed and healthy and vibrant. And this great commandment to love God with all. And then it goes on to say, love others as you love yourselves. And some of us, we don't think of ourselves well. Our inner conversation of how we talk to ourselves is we run ourselves down and we hold our past against us when Jesus has forgiven it. And we don't love ourselves well. And so it makes it hard to love others well. And if you're going to be quiet and connect meaningfully with God and others and have a good, healthy self, it's going to require soul care. It's going to require being quiet and perhaps letting God lead you to a place of quiet. Because to be honest, sometimes quietness scares us. We don't like where our thoughts drift. We don't like what thoughts creep in. We're uncomfortable with it for various reasons. But Psalm 46:10 says this. Here's why it's so important. He says, "Be still and know that I am God." I really believe that being still is necessary to know God well. And we live in a world where quiet and still does not happen easily. To do that, it's going to take intentionality to be still. And sometimes we find ourselves at a place where there's a lack of clarity. And we're trying to drive in a blizzard, a blinding blizzard, and expect to see with clarity. What it requires sometimes is for us to stop and be still. I can tell you the analogy that really helped me with that. I've got a snow globe here, and here's one picture up there. And you know what a snow globe is. It's one of those things where when you shake it up, all this stuff kind of floats up and kind of presents kind of a nice winter scene, or actually mine's a beach scene with a palm tree and there's not many blizzards on the beach, but this has glitter, so I've never experienced that at the beach either. But that's what this is, because I like palm trees. Seeing a palm tree is a place that's leading me beside quiet waters. I read that verse about he leads me beside quiet waters. I always feel like God's telling me to go to a beach. Like that just seems necessary. So this is on my desk. But the thing with the snow globe is when it gets really active, everything gets stirred up. And then when you set it down, it stays active for a while. And then things start to settle more and more and more until ultimately everything is settled. And for many of us, we're living our lives constantly moving and constantly having input. And we're going, why isn't there stillness in my life? Because there's not stillness in your life. You're not choosing to be still, to push pause, to push mute, to just be still. And not just to be still for stillness' sake, but to be still and know that he is God. To know that sometimes stillness requires, okay, I can be still because I know that he's got it. There's a God and it's not me. I can pause, I can take a break, I can go to sleep, I can take a vacation, I can take a rest because God has got this. Quieting and stillness is needed to let things settle. Parker Palmer tells a story about kind of what happens in the Midwest and in Canada. A lot of times farmers and ranchers in the winter will tie a rope from their door of their house to the door of the barn because unexpectedly blizzard conditions can show up and it gets so blinding that they can't find their way from one to the other. And so in those times, they grab the rope and they follow it till it brings them back to a safe place. We don't have that problem here. Don't go home and tie a rope to your house, to your car, or wherever it is. But in those places where people have not done that at times, people have died feet away from their front door. They died from what they thought was being frozen and passing out. And they thought they were close to their front door, but they were actually much further away. They were disoriented. And if you've ever driven in like all of a sudden a heavy snowstorm, there's two things you would know. One is it feels like you're going at light speed in Star Wars, you know, like all the snow going by like that. It's kind of cool, but also you can't see anything. And it's kind of white knuckle. And it makes you want to slow down and be very careful. What God says is the habit of quieting, the habit of stillness, the habit of solitude is that rope that helps you find your way back to a place where he can lead you beside quiet waters, deeply connected, not just to a safe place, but to the safe person of God's, that loving relationship with him. We have a God-given need for quiet, stillness, and solitude. Quiet is that idea where I'm going to push mute. I'm going to figure out what kind of noise is speaking into my life. I'm going to figure out what goes on when I try to still myself. Like what are the things that kind of keep going when I try to be still? Sometimes it's what's happening in our thoughts. Sometimes it's what's happening around us. Some of us in a place of life where I can push mute on me, but I can't push mute on them. Quiet is hard because of the season of life we're in. Then there's this idea of stillness, which is less about volume, but more about activity, about pace. Then there's this idea of solitude, that there's times where I need to unplug from people and just be still by myself and know that I am, and know that He is God. Now, we talk a lot at Live Oak about community, that you were created for connection with others. I 100% believe that's true. But you're also created for Jesus to be the primary relationship in your life. And we sometimes do better at carving out time for others than we do for just being still and being with God. Spending some time praying or reading scripture or just being still. When we talk about solitude, we're not talking about isolation. Those are two different things. Some of us live lives that are isolated. We're not connected to others. Solitude does not mean you disconnect from others. It just means you push pause and have some slices of your time where you can be alone. Wayne Cordero says it this way: solitude is a healthy prescriptive and discipline. Isolation is a symptom of emotional depletion. If you find yourself pulling away from people, sometimes that's a sign that emotionally you're just spent. We're not talking about isolation, we're talking about solitude, of being one-on-one with the idea that God has promised to be present with you. Let's talk about how do you do that? How do you get that in your life? Psalm 132 says this. Psalm 131 verse 2 says this. But I have calmed and quieted myself. How could that be true of you? How could you agree with the psalmist when you say, you know what, right now, I have calmed and quieted myself? Because for me, when I try to do this, it's very challenging. Sometimes it's because of season of life. Sometimes it's because of external factors. A lot of times it's internal. So I want to give you 3 steps, 3 things you could do this week that could help bring quiet into your world and into the world. The first one is this: assess. How quiet is your world? Like if you were to go around with a quiet detector or a noise detector, and you were to measure how quiet is your world, we're talking external noise, noise that you can't control, noise that you don't invite in, noise that you do invite in, things you look to, stillness, quietness. Scale of 1 to 100, 100 being loud, so it's so unbearable. 0 being completely quiet. Like, what number would you give the quiet level in your world? What's the noise level like of 1 to 100? 100 being the loudest, 1 being the softest. And then as you kind of do that, figure out where's the noise coming from. You ever had a smoke detector go out in the middle of the night, but you have more than one smoke detector? So as it's literally chirping you, you hear it and you kind of go, okay, it's over here. No, wait, no, it's over here. And you're trying to figure out where's the noise coming from. Or have you ever had a car that you've been driving, all of a sudden it makes a weird noise? And you're like, where'd that noise come from? Or it's late at night, you hear a strange noise in the house. You've just watched a movie like A Quiet Place and you're kind of freaked out. You're like, where'd that noise come from? We need to be asking that question in our life. Where's the noise coming from? Where's the source of noise in my life? And maybe a better question would be, how do you keep you from quiet? For some of us, we don't handle boredom well. It starts when we're kids, right? We have a little free time, nothing to do. That's some of our dream scenario, right? Like, what do you have to do today? Nothing. Oh man, that must be what winning the lottery feels like. Like some of us like dream of that. But as kids, I've got nothing to do. I'm bored. But you've got this, you've got that, you've got that. And enjoy the fact that you've got nothing to do. But I'm bored. For some of us, boredom is not something we handle well. So we pick up the pace, we kill the stillness, we turn up the noise, we kill the quiet. Some of it's fear. There's a very real fear or anxiety that comes when quietness happens. because we can't still and quiet our minds. And we start thinking about things and processing, and the inner noise gets so loud, and fear and guilt, or fear and anxiety get there, but sometimes for us it's guilt. Some of us are doers and achievers, and quiet just feels wrong. Stillness feels unproductive. For some of us, it's just uneasy. I don't know what to do with my hands. I feel so awkward when it's quiet. I got to do something. For many of it's the fact that it's become a habit. Just like quiet and stillness and solitude are habits that we need to develop. Activity, noise, sometimes isolation rather than solitude, those things become habits. It's just a habit. We just on autopilot with how we live. Sometimes we're just very busy. I literally can't fit everything in the week. So something's got to give. And I guess it's going to be quiet. Technology has not served us well in that area. Technology has created noise in our world. So at some point we have to take charge of our technology because it's taken charge of us. And many of us do a better job of recharging our phones than recharging our minds, our souls, and our hearts. I can't think of the last day where I forgot to plug in my phone at night to make sure it was charged the next day. But I can think of many instances where I rolled through a stop sign where I should have paused, or I turned up the volume when I should have been quiet. And what comes down to a lot of us is just a lack of intentionality. When I think about my world and how quiet it is, I don't see the intentionality like I should. So if you want to calm and quiet yourself, it starts with assessing how quiet is your world. And then you actually need to act. You need to do something with that knowledge. And the question here is, how will you quiet your world some this week? We can't go through in a silent world. I don't think we're called to go through in a silent world. As a matter of fact, there are times where quiet is not a good thing. You have to speak up. But there are times where you have to be quiet. Not just in speaking to others, but in how you quiet your soul. How will you quiet your world this week? Some. To find some quiet this week. To find some space this week. How will you try to create quiet? To find a quiet place and to fight for it. Because there are many things that will seek to wrestle away a quiet space from you. Everybody's looking for a voice. How can you move the needle closer? Let's say your world is a 55 or a 65 or a 75, whatever it is on a scale of 1 to 100. Let's say it's an 88. How do you move it down to an 80? How do you move it just a few clicks quieter? How can you find some quiet pockets and space? Think of a remote control. How could you push pause, push mute, or at least turn down the volume with others, with yourself, and to focus in on your relationship with God? And the thing, because I think a quiet space is a place that you have to work hard to find, and when you find it, you have to fight for it. Like most battles in life, you can't fight it alone. So just like I want you to assess kind of the quietness of your world and then take some action, I want to invite you to take some action on somebody else's behalf. Because the last step is to aid somebody else. How can you help bring some quiet into someone else's world this week? Is there someone in your life that you could help bring some quiet into their world? You could say, let me buy you some space. My wife did that this week. She had been out of town all week, and so my world was very loud as I was watching the two kids by myself. And so Saturday she said, hey, why don't you get away for a couple hours and work on some stuff you need to do, or just do nothing, just do that. And so she helped me find that quiet place. And I'm grateful for that. How could you do that for somebody else this week? How could you help bring some quiet into somebody else's world this week? That might look like going to coffee with somebody or going to lunch with somebody and just listening. And Maybe not even asking a ton of questions, just simply be quiet together. Maybe it's saying, hey, I'll take the kids tonight and you go do this. Maybe it's a roommate that you say, hey, I was challenged this week to find some quiet space and here's why. Could we hold each other accountable to try and put that in our schedule? Maybe you could do that in a small group. Maybe at work you could say, hey, today, why don't you take off and I'll look after this for you. Is there some way you can help bring some quiet into somebody else's world this week? I think quiet is something that refreshes our soul, and noise is something that does incredible damage. And when we think about noise levels, we think about its effect on hearing and it affects on the experiment with the lawnmower and the kid that drops the books and the people's lack of ability to have compassion. I never thought there'd be a connection between quiet and compassion. I think there are more links to a lack of quiet than we think and the damage it does to our soul. So as you assess that this week and think about that, think about your relationship with others. What does the lack of quiet do in your expressing compassion and care for others, relating well to others? But also think about it, that's loving others. How is it with loving God? How does a lack of quiet affect your ability to love God well? Psalm 46:10 says this. He says, be still and know that I am God. What does that mean? What does that look like to be still this week? Maybe it might mean being still means praying and saying that God always wants to hear and us to pour out our hearts to him, to make our requests known to him with thanksgiving. That's what it says in Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Pray about everything. Do that. But what if you incorporated some silence into your time? And you just push pause, and instead of talking the whole time, you listened. For some of us, listening to God is challenging. We're actually going to talk about that next week, how quiet is necessary for us to hear from God. But what would it look like for you to be still and seek to know God in quiet? I want to challenge you this week to put some prompts in your life that help you push pause. Even if it's just briefly. Maybe it's pushing the power button on the radio in the car off and just no sound when you're driving by yourself. Maybe it's looking at your schedule and saying, hey, here's a couple of pockets where I could just say, I'm going to be quiet. But find some prompts that remind you on a regular basis to try and quiet and still yourself. And even sometimes that's a stillness and an activity issue. Sometimes it's a volume issue. But one prompt we want to give you that could be a tool that could help you with this is this. We've got this lock screen, and I've actually got it on my phone, where it says, be still and know that I am God. Isn't it ironic that I'm talking about how technology invades? I've already got a couple text messages on here. It's just, there's always something. But when I do that, what I see is there's that prompt, be still and know that I'm God. Ironically, it's covered up by a text message right now. That's a sermon in of itself. Anyway, but there's the be still, know that I am God. You can use that as a lock screen on your phone, desktop, on your wallpaper. If you have an Apple Watch, I was able to take that, and now it's every time I look at the time on my watch, I see that be still and know that I am God reference. God's invitation to be still is an invitation to know him and know that he is God. He's got this. Even in the midst of chaos, God is not rattled. And it requires me being still sometimes to recognize and know him well. You can get it there on the website, on the Live Oak app, or you can find it on the Live Oak's Instagram or Facebook pages. But that's a prompt where maybe as you look down on your phone, it would remind you to not look down at your phone. Or to at least push pause. To not push play, to turn the volume down, to do something. And for some of us, this really pushes us. It challenges us because stillness is not an easy thing. So in this series, we're going to talk about quiet in different aspects in our different relationships with God, with each other, with the world. But I think the need for quiet is more important than we think. And actually, in our world that is so loud, our choice to be quiet at times will speak the loudest and enable God to have the loudest voice in our lives. So this week, what will you do to quiet your world? Hey, if you have a program, go ahead and pull it out because there's something I want to call your attention to. Changing gears here. Lubbock is a college town. I can't remember how many students are at Tech now, but it's growing each and every year. Does anyone know how many students are there? Is it 40,000? 36,000, something like that? There's a lot of college students. And if you live here in the fall, spring, and the summer, all three kind of seasons, summer feels different when college students leave. They bring energy and activity to the town that's awesome. Well, our Live Oak is not positioned near the Texas Tech campus, but it's not that far. But chances are in your world, you know somebody who's college aged. And Live Oak believes that college age is an important season of life as people try to navigate transitions. And last Sunday was Next Gen Sunday, and we highlight the stat that kids and students that grow up connected to a faith community, when they transition into college, as many as 5, 6, or 7 out of 10 will disengage from their faith community and their faith of practicing it and living it out on a daily basis. We don't like that stat. We want to change it. So we've changed the way we do ministry for 18 and under, but we're also trying to be more intentional what we do with college-age students. And in your program, there's a section called Live Oak College Ministry. And if you look at that and go, well, I'm not in college, it doesn't apply to me. We think everybody should do something to know and invest in the next generation. And a way you can do that this week is simply take the information here about this thing called The Gathering that's happening Friday night, this Friday the 15th, at the Tech campus in the sub, in the Matador room, where they're going to have dinner, worship, and a talk on questions that students have about dating and relationships. If you know a college-age student, would you pass that on to them? This would be a great way for them to get connected to some others and for them to be invested in by some people that really care about college-age people. If you see something on social media about the gathering this week, would you like it, comment it, and share it? Maybe share it personally with someone you know that's a college-age person. But living in a college town, chances are you know somebody who's college age. And simply information that's printed or digital and shared on social media does not have near the impact as someone who cares enough about someone to personally invite them and invest in them. I would just ask you, is there a way this week you can know and invest in the next generation? Maybe you could help create some quiet space for them this week. Maybe you could do something for them to encourage and highlight that that's important for them. But one way you might be able to do that is to say, hey, there's a gathering of some college-age people this Friday night at Tech, and this would be a great environment for you. And if they're like, man, I don't know anybody, why don't you go with them? That wouldn't be creepy. It'd be okay. We want adults investing in the next generation. And there's going to be food and worship and a time where there's a talk and some FAQ about relationships, which is a big part of the college-age world. And if you're a college-age person, we want you to know that you matter to us incredibly. We think you're incredibly important, and you're in a strategic season of life that we want to help you navigate this season well. Last week we did this message on talking to ourselves, what would we go back and tell our younger self? And the reality is we can't go back and tell our younger self what we wish we could. But we can take that wisdom and tell somebody else. So what I would invite you, if you're a college-age person, go to someone who's already navigated that season of life and ask them, hey, is there some wisdom that you wish you had known then that I could know now? Because we want to invest in you. And one of the best things you could do if you're a college-age student is show up at the gathering, invite some others to go with you, or if you know a college-age person, invite them and encourage them to go and be part of that. Last week we challenged people to write a letter to someone who's in the next generation. We can't go back and tell our younger selves, but we can go back and tell someone in the next generation what we wish we knew, the wisdom we wish we had. And I can't tell you how moved I am that someone took that literally and wrote a letter to my son. And the fact that Blake Porter would write out a 4-page letter to my son saying, John, here's what I want you to know as you approach middle school. It means the world to me. So I want to highlight that challenge again. You can't go back and tell your younger self what you wish you knew then that you know now. But there is somebody else navigating those transitions. And your voice matters more than you think. Please speak wisdom into each other's lives. We live in a world that we're so concerned about offending somebody that we don't say wisdom. And we leave a lot of people wandering in the dark and wonder why our world is lost. And I am thankful that some of you took that literally to write down a letter, especially one of you. Because Blake Porter writing that to my son today, we're going to go to lunch, Blake and myself and my son, and he's going to give my son that letter. And I don't know what John will do with it. You never know what people will do with the wisdom you pass on. But say it. And one of the best examples, and something that will be counterculturally different in our world, is if we choose to be people who push pause and practice quiet and live a quiet life. As a matter of fact, the Bible speaks to the importance of, in 1 Thessalonians, make it your goal to do your work and live a quiet life. To pray for those who are in leadership and authority in our world, both in government, in schools, in leadership, in any role. Pray for them so that we would live a quiet life. There's something about quiet that matters more than you think. So how will you bring quiet into your world this week? Let's stand for closing prayer. God, thanks that you love us enough, that you challenge us and speak a hard truth to tell us sometimes just to be quiet. Sometimes, most of the time, when I tell someone to be quiet, it's usually because I'm mad or something's wrong. But when you tell us to be quiet, it's because you care for us. And you know that quiet is necessary for a healthy soul. It's necessary to know you well and to love others well. God, help us to assess the noise level in our life, to take some steps, to push pause, to push mute, to turn down the volume this week. And then help us be people that bring a quiet place into others' lives and create a quiet place for others where they can be still and know that you're God. God, thanks for the gift of solitude, of Sabbath, of quiet. Help us to bring that into our lives this week. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thanks for being here. If you'd like to talk with me down at the front.